Good evening. I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. The president-elect in Tehran. His name is Hassan Rouhani. He's a cleric. I will speak of him through the program. What is important here is that nothing has changed. Rouhani works for the Supreme Leader. The Supreme Leader has very much committed to the Tehran regime, the Twelvers, to predation in the area, in the region. And part of that predation is Syria, crossing Iraq's boundaries with convoys, with air flights, and with men, material, and money flowing into Syria to support the Assad regime. What has changed significantly, not the election in Tehran, is that the President of the United States, through the voice of the Deputy National Security Advisor within these last days, has committed the United States to what appears to be material support, weapons, for the resistance in Syria. That is a puzzle. That puzzle presents all of the players in the region questions to be answered, and I can't answer them. I don't think anybody can. So I welcome analysts Tom Joscelyn and Bill Roggio, the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies Long War Journal. Because though Bill and Tom and their sites, both Long War Journal and others, document and follow the chronology of the jihadists, the al-Qaeda jihadists in particular, the situation in Syria is a combination of a civil war and al-Qaeda exploiting a collapsed region, a failed state, Syria, and the region around it, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, Kurdistan, which is a non-state state, and Turkey. So, gentlemen, a very good evening to you. I begin with you, Tom, because you have a piece up right now that illustrates the scale of the confusion in Syria and in Iraq. A man by the name of al-Baghdadi, who is the leader of the al-Qaeda forces in Iraq in open revolt from the Maliki regime hard-pressed, in fact, by the attacks of these last days, is refuting what looked to be the overcall of Zawahiri, the al-Qaeda commander from Afghanistan, Pakistan. And he looks to be refuting the idea that he does not control or that there is not such an entity as al-Qaeda in Iraq and the Levant. Good evening, Tom. Who is al-Baghdadi that he's pushing back against Zawahiri?
Well, good evening, John. Al-Baghdadi, that's Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. He runs al-Qaeda in Iraq and the Islamic State of Iraq, which is al-Qaeda's political front and otherwise front in Iraq. And what happened is in early April, al-Baghdadi tried to subsume the al-Nusra Front. This is al-Qaeda's affiliate in Syria, al-Qaeda's branch in Syria. Al-Baghdadi tried to subsume the al-Nusra Front under his command and fold them both al-Qaeda in Iraq and the al-Nusra Front into a new branded organization called al-Qaeda in Iraq and the Levant. Now, what happened was that happened on April 8th. 2 days later, within 2 days anyway, the head of the al-Nusra Front, a guy named Abu Muhammad al-Julani, fired back and actually said, no, we're not going to fold into the same organization under al-Qaeda in Iraq's command. Instead, I'm reaffirming my loyalty directly to Ayman al-Zawahiri, he said in the statement. So in other words, he's going to report to the big man himself. He's not going to be reporting to one of Zawahiri's commanders in Iraq. Now, what's interesting is this then precipitated a whole chain of events within al-Qaeda circles. And in fact, we have a letter from Ayman al-Zawahiri. This is the head of al-Qaeda himself, a letter written on May 23rd that details the whole back and forth on this dispute. And in that May 23rd ruling, Zawahiri, after receiving reports from both the al-Nusra Front and al-Qaeda in Iraq and others, ruled that the two entities would remain separate. Now, very interesting, in the days and weeks after this, what's now happened is that al-Baghdadi in Iraq has refuted Zawahiri's ruling and said he won't abide by it. And al-Baghdadi has issued a statement not through al-Qaeda in Iraq's official media arm, but instead independently. And so that's all very suspicious.
Very suspicious, and a measure of some of the confusion that the U.S. enters into if it is indeed to change its policy of arming the resistance because it is impossible. Bill Roggio, I welcome Bill. You have a piece up within these last days, Bill, about the spokesman, Mr. Rhodes of the National Security Council, indicating that the Obama administration will arm whoever the resistance is, talking about the red line, chemical weapons. As a caveat, I cannot confirm that chemical weapons were used by the Assad regime. There is no confirmed, to my knowledge, out of Jerusalem. There is no confirmed out of Moscow. That's been in the news. But in any event, we've moved past that. I'm no longer going to refute who would think about using intelligence to trigger a change in policy. I can't imagine the Obama administration following that old playbook. Bill, arming what? What does the administration say about arming the resistance? How are they going to keep these weapons out of the hands of al-Qaeda? Good evening, Bill.
Good evening, John. Yeah, that's the real question. I mean, there's several questions here. One, we have to identify who the so-called secular opposition is inside Syria. And two, how do you keep weapons distributed to these groups from falling into the hands of groups like the al-Nusra Front? The administration hasn't identified how this is going to be done. And the problem is that several of the individuals and groups that they're looking to work with have actually expressed either support or affinity to the al-Nusra Front. For instance, Colonel Riyad, who's one of the co-founders of the Free Syrian Army and a senior commander in the group, a couple of months ago was praising the al-Nusra Front up and down, calling them our brothers, and talking about their prowess on the battlefield and how, just how great these guys are, and they're happy to have them. Would we consider Colonel Riyad to be a secular moderate that we can trust? And the problem about these weapons falling into the hands of the al-Nusra Front is a really big concern. Back in early to mid-May, there was a report that over 3,000 fighters and some groups en masse from the Free Syrian Army had defected to the al-Nusra Front.
We hear that routinely.
From the beginning of the year to May.
We hear that routinely, Bill, defecting to al-Nusra. And let's identify what the Wall Street Journal has pointed out to be the weapons that the Syrian Military Council wants that may or may not go directly to al-Nusra. 200 Russian-made Konkur anti-tank missiles, 100 shoulder-fired anti-aircraft weapons. Bill, are we thinking giving them man-pads?
I suspect that the administration wouldn't go that far. At least I'd like to think so. That would be utterly insane to do. But given what I see a lack of really a seriousness about Syrian policy, nothing would surprise me at this point. Again, I think it would be unlikely for man-pads. And keep in mind, this is General Idris, the head of the Free Syrian Army.
The Syrian Military Council head. He's the boss. Who would you supply if you weren't going to supply Idris?
Right. By the way, he said some nice things about the Nusra Front in the past.
300,000 rounds of Kalashnikov ammunition, 100,000 rounds of rifle ammunition, 50,000 rounds of machine gun ammunition. I quote a very famous movie from Once Upon a Time, Dr. Strangelove. I don't know if you could start a war with this, but you could have a heck of a weekend in Las Vegas with it. Good heavens, Bill.
Keep in mind, that's what he just wants to defend, Aleppo, which is one city that's going to come under siege from the Syrian military. So he's going to be asking for a lot more than that. Whether he gets it's another question, but, he's shooting high.
Tom, let's check with you on this detail. Is there any information that we're ready to give the Syrian Military Council man-pads? Man-pads, by the way, is a technical term for a shoulder-fired anti-aircraft weapon. You can all understand why that in the hands of any of these jihadists would mean a vital threat to all of Europe, all of America. Tom, do we have any information that we've done it already?
Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen either. I doubt it, just like Bill does. I think the other smaller arms are in play, though. The massive amounts of ammunition, there's going to be things along those lines I could definitely see happening. The problem is when you look at Aleppo, you're talking about the defense of Aleppo, this is a place where they've already set up Sharia courts. The Islamists have already moved in hardcore. And, my bigger problem here is, and I ask everybody the same question, where do you draw the line between the al-Nusra Front and the various other groups it's fighting alongside on a day-to-day basis inside Syria? And how do you know that these groups are not more fluid than you're imagining them to be? And the problem is nobody can answer that question. Nobody can tell me, where the line is and how we can compartmentalize sort of one Syrian rebel group that we can arm and feel comfortable with and know that it's not going to advance al-Nusra's cause either directly or indirectly. I mean, the game that al-Qaeda plays in each one of these insurgencies, every time it exists inside one, is either co-opt or eliminate its opposition. And they're very good at that game, and unless we're there to actually manage that in a more, and I'm not calling for this, but unless we're there to manage that, American military, it's very difficult to keep it in its box.
Tom Joscelyn and Bill Roggio of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies Long War Journal. Has the Obama administration changed its policy? ? Will the Obama administration pass this long list of ammunition into the hands of the Syrian Military Council? ? Will the Syrian Military Council keep back this enormous amount of ammunition from al-Qaeda? ? I'm John Batchelor. This is The John Batchelor Show.